been a participant, never actually done one.
So we're going to start now for your first webinar, Bethany.
Great.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on this extremely important new book, Falsehood and Fallacy, How to Think, Read, and Write in the 21st Century by Bethany Kilcrease. I am Natalie Fingerhut, and I had the very, very real privilege of being the editor on this book. I'm going to begin now with our land acknowledgement. We wish to acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of the Credit River. Today, this meeting place is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Lake, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. And now I am just so pleased to have the opportunity to introduce Bethany Kilcrease from Aquinas College. Bethany is a historian of 19th and 20th century Britain and a popular instructor of first-year courses in modern world history and composition, where she has witnessed many falsehoods and fallacies in her students' writing. A few years ago, I was looking for books that taught historical skills, and I stumbled across Bethany's listicle, which detailed particular reading and thinking and writing errors that had often appeared in her students' work and her own on occasion. This listicle then morphed into this book. Bethany clearly believes that thinking and reading and writing is different now with the dependence on online sources, and that we now need different or revised tools. Facts versus opinions, the crap test, bias in media sources, these tools and more can be found in this slender, smart, and sassy book. Welcome, Bethany.
Natalie, thank you so much. That was quite the introduction for the book, Slender, Smart, and Sassy. I wouldn't mind having that for myself. So thank you for that. So let's go ahead and get rolling with this. I'm going to share my screen and go ahead and bring up the slides. And I know that Natalie said that this project did start in perhaps some quote unquote errors or fallacies that I've seen in student papers, which I suppose is true, but it's equally true, like she said, that, I mean, this is stuff that I'm working on too, that we're all working on. I was actually just talking about this with my intro level world history class a couple days ago, I think. And I was mentioning on their paper revisions that they all were going to have 3 comments of things to work on, regardless of what the grade on the paper might happen to be. And, you know, they were sort of like, well, what if I got an A on the paper? Do I still have 3 things to work on? And I said, well, yes, because if you're a baseball player, do you ever stop developing your baseball skills? If you're an artist, do you ever stop developing your painting? I personally enjoy a little bird watching on the side. And, you know, I keep wanting to work on learning those bird songs. So yeah, regardless of how the paper might be assessed, everybody always has more things to work on. And that's true of thinking and reading as well. And so I'm right there with the students. And I think all of us as instructors realize that this is an ongoing project for all of us, not just for our students. And we're kind of in the trenches with them as we're trying to work through these issues, which are made all the more complicated, perhaps, by advances in media technology, social media in particular, the creation of things like echo chambers, the prevalence of quote unquote fake news, and things like this. All right, so the first thing I wanted to talk about is the issue of fact versus opinion. So if you guys are so good as to pick up a copy of this lovely little book that the wonderful people of University of Toronto Press have helped put together, you'd see that it goes through a variety of different things, but it's broken up into a first chunk dealing with falsehoods and a second chunk dealing with fallacies, and then a third kind of part dealing with bringing it together in the writing process. And the third chapter in particular deals with evaluating statements and identifying sources. Now, this is something that's obviously, I think, a pretty hot topic today, perhaps even more so than when I was writing the book back in 2019, 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, as we've been deluged with all kinds of statements that need to be really critically scrutinized. Are these factual statements? Are they fact? Are they opinion? What's going on here? Especially now that we might actually have life and death consequences when it comes to discerning nature of these statements. So one of the things that I talk about in the book is the distinction between a fact and also factual statements and opinions on page 28. So I'm using here definitions from a Pew Research Center study that came out in 2018. And basically they define a factual statement as a statement that can be either proven or disproven based on objective evidence. It's also worth noting that with students, you're going to want to first talk about what does objectivity mean, right? Because oftentimes people don't really know, and the book does talk about that as well prior to this, but that's worth talking about. What does it mean to be objective? What does it mean for something to be subjective or relative or in the mind? Because these are concepts that are not always obvious to everybody. And that's true really across the board, right? It's always worth discussing what exactly these concepts mean. In any case, a fact then is a factual statement that's been proven and therefore is true, right? So factual statement could be either proven or disproven based on objective evidence. A fact is a factual statement that's been proven and is therefore true. An opinion is a subjective statement that cannot be either proven or disproven based on objective evidence. So why is this so important and something worth talking about with students in a variety of fields? So people have asked me, where do you envision this book being used? And I've said, well, I think it could be used in a variety of classroom settings. I kind of envisioned, I'm a historian, so obviously lower level, perhaps history courses or intro to the discipline or historiography courses, methods courses, but it's designed also to be used in any kind of humanities or social science class, first year experience type classes, that kind of thing, wherever you might need some kind of way, a springboard to talk about some of these issues with your students. Anyway, again, why is this also important? Well, we know that everybody in general just struggles with this distinction, which, as I said earlier, is just so important today when some of these discernments have life and death consequences, right? So the Pew study in 2018 found that if you take, I think it was, boy, maybe don't quote me on this, but I think if you take 10 political statements and you ask people, can you determine if this political statement is a fact or an opinion? Only 26% could correctly identify all the factual statements. Okay, and this is just sort of a statistically random set of adults. Only 35% could correctly identify all the opinion statements. So this is a skill that we need to be teaching our students. Also, I'm just going to give you guys a real world class slice of life example here of where something like this would come in handy in the classroom as an exercise to do with your students. So this really happened to me, and you're all probably thinking she's making this up, right, just for this webinar. But this really happened to me just a few class periods ago. It was the day that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine was pulled temporarily in the US. And I didn't know this yet. It was in the morning class, and one of my students jumped up and apparently got some kind of an alert on his phone and said, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine has been pulled. The New York Times has a story. And then another student jumped up and said, it's unsafe. You're all sheep. And then another student jumped up and said, this is an exaggeration to appease all the anti-vaxxers. And again, you might think I'm just making this up, but anyone where I work can tell you I'm still threading deeply over the extent to which I've managed this successfully as a professor. In any case, this would be a good point to stop and try and break down. Now, this had nothing to do with the class topic, but it'd be a good point to stop and break down what they're saying. Okay, where's the facts? You know, what's a factual statement? Was the Johnson & Johnson vaccine pulled? Yeah, we can go back and we can prove that, okay, objectively. Is it unsafe and are we all sheep? Well, let's talk about that. Is that an opinion? Is that a factual statement? Is this an exaggerated response to appease anti-vaxxers? Again, we can go back and perhaps talk about that. So at this point, let's actually take a look at one of the exercises in the book. So we've got an exercise in here on factual statements versus opinions. And for you guys who are in the Zoom webinar, you'll have a chance to go ahead and do a poll to actually do the exercise here in an online poll format. For those of you who are viewing, streaming live on YouTube, we're unable to get you access to the poll, so I'm sorry about that. However, you can type questions or answers and participate in that way by using the comment box, okay? So again, apologies that we're unable to get the poll to you, but for those of you who are here Zooming in live on the webinar, please go ahead and evaluate the following statements. So, oh, look, it popped up for me too. Can I vote in this? Can I vote in this too? Okay. So what I'll just kind of talk along as you guys start working on this. So let's all work on this together on this project here. So I was actually kind of retaking this exercise, this quiz or whatever, myself yesterday, just to look back through what I had written. I thought, oh boy, there's actually some nuances here I don't remember from when I originally wrote it. I might disagree with some of my answers now at this point. So it's also a good way just to get students talking, right, about what it means, a factual statement versus an opinion, where there might be some nuance there, because these things aren't all black and white. And critical thinking, although I think that's a kind of an overused buzzword, but nevertheless, is not, generally speaking, a black and white proposition. There's oftentimes nuance that we need to acknowledge. I think the screen actually wants me to, does it want me to participate or not? I'm not sure what it wants me to do. I'll just delete it. So it actually says here, again, you can see on the exercise from the book, it says, note, there may be some room to debate whether or not the following statements are entirely factual or are entirely opinion. And I think this will be the most interesting part of the class. In addition, I would really, really hate for people to get this book, use it in a classroom setting, and then just stick with the exercises that are in the book, right? That's 100% not my intention, and I don't believe that's the intention of the publishers either. So the idea is to give you ideas as instructors of ways that you can then jump off from this and do your own thing in class. So I think a really great thing to do, actually, would be you could read statements from the news, you could take your own books that you're assigning or your own articles or whatever else you happen to be reading in class, and pull statements from that and have students do a similar exercise. Right? This would be something great to do in class, not as a solitary assignment. Actually, one thing that I wish we could have maybe had happen in the webinar would be if we did more of like a think, pair, share thing, and we were able to get participants to get together and then talk through these and see what they both thought about it. It might actually, in some cases, if you had examples that were maybe a little bit more nuanced than some of the ones I put up here, be interesting to do just to play devil's advocate, to do kind of a pro and con sort of approach and have one student, even if they thought otherwise, argue one side versus the other. Just a way to get students to talk about the issue. I'm just going to advance the slide here. Oh, maybe. Oh, I guess I can't. I was going to show you the rest of the things there. Oh, we got the poll results. All right. Let's see what we got here. So for number one, the worst measles outbreak since 1994 occurred in 2019. 91% of you thought that was a factual statement, 9% said opinion. You know, the funny thing is, that's the one, when I was going back through this just the other night, I thought, you know, worst, what, you know, maybe, you know, yeah, we can, and what I say in the, you know, the answers in the book is, yeah, we can, you know, go through and we can quantify that and say, yeah, there were actually more people who contracted measles in 2019, right, than has happened since 1994. But one thing I didn't think of is, you know, what does worst mean? That's a little subjective. Maybe you could look at some other measures by which it might not be the worst. So yeah, that could be interesting to look at. But in general, yeah, factual statement. This one, everybody thinks is an opinion. Yep, I agree. Too much government makes people less self-sufficient and damages their self-esteem. Yeah. An American foreign policy always makes the world a more dangerous place. 4% say factual statement, 98% say opinion. Yeah, I mean, that's another one. I think there is a little bit of room here, some room for discussion. What does dangerous place mean? Does it always make the world a more dangerous place? What do we mean by that? Oh, I'm actually surprised by number 4. People who, especially because I wrote this before the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm interested to see how people are answering it now. People who oppose childhood vaccinations, it says, don't have the best interests of humanity in mind. And 98% think that this is an opinion. And yeah, I would agree with that. It's interesting that you all mostly agree with that one, because we have to consider, you know, what do people think of as the best interests, all of this. Oh, the fantasy Game of Thrones lasted 8 seasons. That's true. The AR in AR-15 stands for Armalite rifle and not assault rifle. It does stand for Armalite, excuse me, rifle. That's true. For life activists, I was kind of skimmed through the rest here. Oh, see, yes, you're right, 4%. I think I might agree with you guys. Season 8 of Game of Thrones was the worst season. 4% of you think that's a factual statement. That I'm tempted to agree, but alas, probably in the answers, it does say that that's an opinion. Jim Mattis resigns. Okay, great. All right, thanks so much for participating in that. So that's just a little example of one of the exercises in the book that you guys could go through with your students and then hopefully use as a springboard off into what you might want to talk about on your own. And oh, looks like my slides don't want to advance anymore. So perhaps that's because of the poll or what have you, but that's okay. After, then the section in the book, actually, after we talk about factual statements versus opinion, the next section actually talks about opinion versus interpretation, because this gets us into even more perhaps nuanced, muddy waters. Right? So what about interpretation? And how is that different than an opinion, you know? And so oftentimes in my class, we talk about, you know, someone might say, well, that's just your opinion. Well, is it? What does it mean to hold an opinion versus an interpretation, which instead is based on evidence and an explanation based on evidence, as opposed to an opinion, which is a belief not based on evidence. And so again, there are some exercises in the book, but it might be more fun just to rip some statements from perhaps a book or a magazine, something you're assigning, and then having students do a similar exercise, but based on your own materials. And again, I think one of the best ways to do this might not be just sitting in a solitary fashion at the desk, but to actually get students talking to each other, doing a think, pair, share, putting students in groups, and then actually having some discussions about it. I know that in my historiography class in particular, regarding interpretation versus opinion, we've had some really great discussions on this topic, right? Where we've taken statements from classic history texts and tried to determine what's interpretation, what's fact, or what's opinion, right? And students have had some very strong thoughts on that, opinions, shall we say, in the past.
Bethany, do you mind just to stop sharing and start again to get the slides to move forward?
Can definitely do that.
Thank you.
I was wondering when Natalie was going to come save me. This is usually in a classroom setting. This is where a student would come save me. I would say, I don't know what I'm doing with the technology. And then I would get a student who actually knows more than me to come up and take care of the computer. Anyway, opinion versus interpretation. There we are there. One last, before I do want to leave time for Q&A, obviously, I see we have some questions in the chat, which is really great. I just want to talk about one more exercise in the book, and then we can certainly hopefully get a little more interactive, take some Q&A. That'd be really great. So the book also talks about critical reading, which is something that's important to do. And it's important, obviously, to read critically. I was actually just in, I think it was a webinar, right? I was a participant in the webinar, and they were talking about the importance of reading for pleasure, right? And which I 100% agree with, which doesn't necessarily involve this kind of sort of pulling apart of the argument of a text. But nevertheless, this is still an important skill to get at what the author is trying to say and get at. So when your students are tackling an especially challenging book or a monograph in your class, it might be a good idea to do a similar exercise like this. Just have them figure out what's the subject, what's the goal of the text, what's the main argument, and how do they try and position themselves relative to other scholarly work. And I just give an example in the book of an article I wrote, actually, that they can just read a couple paragraphs from, and then go back through and figure out where all those chunks are in the article sample that I've given. But a better thing to do might be you could use that example in class, use the exercises, but again, bring in your own books that you're assigning for the class and do the same exercise. And what I like to do in class is to reduce panic, to have students break into sections, right? So I'll have one group of students, you're responsible for finding the goal of this piece. Another group, you're responsible for finding the argument. Another group, you're doing the methodology. Another group, you're going to figure out how this piece positions itself relevant to the other literature, right? And then we'll come together as a whole class and we'll put it all together. And we can actually write like a class, a book review or an article review. And they really get a sense of mastery in that way over the material, and the group work reduces panic, okay? So I think that's an important element as well. We always want to keep the panic level relatively low in the classroom. All right, well, thank you so much for listening. Let's do some Q&A. I think that'd be really fun to do at this point. So Natalie, can you facilitate that for us?
There's been apparently a very good debate among our YouTube participants. One of the questions is from Aaron. Do you spend time discussing with your students an understanding of truth?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, yes. And the extent to which I would do that would depend on the class, to be honest. So if I was in a freshman intro level class, like a world history class, we might talk about, just like I said, objectivity, subjectivity, and truth in that sense. If I was in, say, my senior level historiography class, we would talk about theories of truth, correspondence theory of truth versus an internal coherence theory of truth, and how that might correspond to different epistemologies or theories of knowledge that an individual might hold. So yes, that is worth doing. And it's something that I think you need to read your audience and sort of know where they're at, and also what they're trying to get out of the class in terms of how deep you might want to go into that question. Yeah. Thank you, Aaron.
Bethany, I'm just going to ask you to stop sharing,
Yes.
and then I'm going to give you another question. Do we need to look at authority as a starting point when assessing the veracity of statement of facts versus statement of opinion?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's definitely an important thing to do. That's one of the starting points for sure. We talk about that in the quote unquote crap test chapter, where authority is one of the A's, right? So that's an acronym. I'm talking about currency, different things to measure sources in terms of. But yes, authority and credibility is really important, right? And authority is tied to things like credentials, credibility, all of this. So yes, I think that's something that you'd want to bring in as well. And the book definitely does talk about how you can do that and different ways to assess the authority of writers or speakers. Because we don't want to always think about this, I think, in terms of writing either. There's also speakers, right? We're communicating in different ways, also through visually, through art, comics, graphic novels, that kind of thing too. But yes, great point.
This is actually an excellent question. Could you please say a few words about other sections of the book?
Yeah.
And in particular, to talk about the part of the book that addresses the writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Be more than happy to. So the book, obviously, as you can kind of tell from the title, which is backwards on the screen, Falsehood and Fallacy is broken down. So you can kind of tell into two chunks, right? The first part dealing with falsehood and kind of what we've called maybe the fake news crisis, and how we can determine how we can get through that today, right? What's true out there, to get back to that truth question, because I am concerned about that. And I think the students are concerned about that too. Second section deals with fallacies, the common fallacies that you might see, historical fallacies and otherwise in writing, things like the genetic fallacy or things like that. And the final section is the smallest. It's on writing. And it's dealing with just giving students some tools and some pitfalls to avoid when it comes to writing, a particular style of academic writing. Like I said, I was just in a webinar the other day, and I was thinking, I don't think they'd like this section very much, because they're talking about pleasure writing, which is definitely, yes. I mean, creative writing, yes. So this is not on how to write poetry, for sure. But it's talking about a specific tool, a specific way of doing academic writing and putting together an argument, bringing together evidence to support that, and making a persuasive case, so that we can contribute to a conversation in support of the common good. And I think that's giving students another tool, right? So that they're able to be more creative overall in how they convey their thoughts. So I'm not trying to necessarily squelch students' creativity or pleasure writing by providing a model. I'd like to think of it as a tool in your arsenal. So again, if you're playing softball or something like that, you do need to know how to do a bunt or a bunt slap bunt or something like that to lay down the ball correctly. And that gives you another tool in your arsenal, allowing you to be more creative at the plate overall.
Bethany, unfortunately, we've run out of time. I wanted to say, though, on behalf of all your future readers who are going to benefit so much from what you have put together here, thank you. To the audience, thank you for coming to this session. On our website, you will notice that there is a $5 discount if you enter Falsehood 5 into the code box. And again, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you for attending.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you, Natalie.